All right. In this lecture, we will be talking about the Continental influence and Buddhism. Okay. Last time we talked about the early history of Japan, and we mentioned that the earliest written records in Japan uh, came didn't come until the 7th or 8th century. They were Nihon Shoki or Kojiki. Okay, and according to the Chinese sources, there were many states in Japan. The biggest is called the Yamato state. Later became the Japanese Empire. The Japanese Empire. Around 300 AD, the Chinese records recorded that there were dwarfs coming from the islands, and the Chinese emperor even gave them a golden seal. This is the record Chinese account. The Chinese say our emperor gave the dwarfs a golden seal, and it says Han Chinese emperor appoint the ruler of dwarfs as the king of the dwarfs. Okay, this is the golden seal. It was later discovered in Japan. It was unearthed from underground in Japan. And if you go to Japan, in one of the museums, you could still see this golden seal. Yeah, the, um, the king of dwarfs. Well, are Japanese really dwarfs? Well, they're not necessarily, right? The thing is that uh, the Chinese are called in a traditional Japanese dwarfs because their average height is shorter than the people in the continent. Uh, but we later know that this is because of nutrition, actually. This is nutrition. In terms of gene, the Japanese, their gene is very similar to the people in the continent, like Koreans and Chinese. How do we know this? Well, because after Meiji Restoration, after Meiji Reform, the Japanese Empire implemented a policy to embrace Western culture. So so the imperial government they required all school children, school students, to drink milk. Okay, traditionally East Asian people they don't consume a lot of dairy. Actually, most of them, a high percentage of them are lactose intolerant, like I am. So the consumption of dairy is actually a very special phenomenon in the world. Most East Asian people they never drank milk or eat dairy as their normal daily food. The Japanese certainly didn't do that. But in starting from 19th century, late 19th century, when the Japanese government asked all children to have dairy as part of their diet, the consumption, the intake of calcium is enough. Um, the the average height of Japanese children and adults are getting higher and higher every year after this policy is implemented. Today, the average height of Japanese adults is pretty much the same as the height of Chinese adults. So we know that they're not dwarfs. Dwarfs, okay? Dwarfs is an insulting kind of insulting name that the Chinese gave to the Japanese. They're not dwarfs actually. The average height is the same. Um, but traditional Japan was known to the Chinese as the kingdom of dwarfs. If you look at most of the Chinese sources, that's how it's recorded. Korea. Okay, so during this time period, the civilization is also developing in Korea. There were three kingdoms around 700 AD. Okay, in 700 AD, there were basically three kingdoms in Korea, and they all have very close relations with Japan in terms of trade, in terms of cultural influence, in terms of political diplomacy. Right? For example, Buddhism was transmitted from Korea to Japan. Well, Buddhism was originally from India, but and then it got a flood. It became popular in China in the centuries before this time period. And then Buddhism was transmitted to Korea, and then through Korea to Japan. So that's the route of Buddhism, the spread of Buddhism. Okay, so around 600, 700 AD, there were three kingdoms in Korea. The biggest one in the north is called Goguryeo. uh, and then there were another two in the south. One is called Bakchi, the other called Shila. Okay, this is the Three Kingdoms period, Three Kingdom period of Korea. Well, Japan, the Yamato Empire, had a close relations with all these Korean kingdoms, and around 663, the Japanese wanted to uh, get a foothold in Korea. They invaded Korea. Okay, they sent their own navy to cross the Tsushima Strait to attack Korea. Um, but then the Japanese got stopped by a allied force of Chinese and Koreans, mostly Chinese actually. At that time, there was a very powerful empire in China called the Tang Empire. The Tang Empire sent their navy to help the Koreans, and the Tang Navy defeated, actually totally destroyed the Japanese navy. This happened. This battle happened at in 663, around the Tsushima Strait. Okay, so after this defeat, the Japanese empire realized that they need to learn from the continent. At that time, the empire in the continent is called the Tang Empire. We mentioned that before. China's Tang Empire is very very big. The Tang Empire roughly covers the same area of today's China, okay, except for Tibet and a part of Central Asia. Yeah. So this map shows the cultural influence of the Tang Empire. As you can see that the most part of Japan is under Tang China's cultural influence, including Manchuria, today's China, and northern Vietnam. So Vietnam, China, Korea, these countries were traditionally heavily influenced by Chinese culture. Okay, so if you look at the Tang Empire, um, that's the source of all these cultural inventions that happened in Japan. That's where it's from. Okay, for example, um, the capital city of Tang, China, is in Chang'an City, and that city is totally replanned and then built later, and then populated later. Okay, so so you see city walls around the whole city, and then the whole city is divided into all these rectangles or squares. These are called neighborhoods, right? All these neighborhoods are connected with the walls, are separated by walls and connected with gates. Okay, and then there are two markets. There are two markets: Eastern Market and the Western Markets, uh, in the city. And then also there are Buddhist temples, there are Christian churches in the city. Uh, the Imperial Palace is in the north. This is the Imperial Palace. Okay, this is where the emperor, the Chinese emperor, lives. Okay, so this is a typical structure of a Chinese East Asian style capital city. Okay, the Japanese learned all this after the defeat, military defeat. The Japanese and imperial government, they send hundreds of students to China, to Tang China to study. They study the law, they study the Buddhism, they study the government, they study the architecture, they study the culture, writing system, poetry, everything, and also how to build your capital city. So, so Japanese learn how to build your capital city from Chinese. Now, this is the Nara city. Nara city is still there today in Japan. So if you have a chance to go to Japan, definitely go to Nara city to look at the ancient structure of the old capital and the old imperial palace. Yeah, during World War II, the U.S. Air Force, they were kind enough not to bomb the Nara city and the and Kyoto, the old imperial palace. So this is why that's why these ancient Japanese cities survived. Okay, so if you look at the map of this Japanese Nara city, you will find out that the structure is the same. Okay, the city is basically a square or a rectangle shape. Okay, and there are horizontal and vertical streets separating the whole city into different neighborhoods. Okay, there and again, just like the Chinese Chang'an city, there are two markets: Eastern Market, Western Market. Okay, and then within the city, there are Buddhist temples and other perhaps Shinto temples, Shinto monasteries. And then the imperial palace, again, is in the north. See, just like exactly like the Chinese Chang'an city. Okay, the emperor, the Japanese emperor, lives in the northern part of the city. So, of course, this is much smaller. The Japanese Nara city is much smaller, but the structure is exactly the same as the larger Chinese Chang'an city. Okay, and then if you look at the women, this is a Tang aristocratic women. They have very big hair. They're gonna spend a lot of time taking care of their hair every day. Um, and this is Japanese Nara period uh, aristocrat. You can see that their clothing, their makeup, their hairstyle, exactly the same, like the Tang style, like the Tang style. Okay, actually, the Japanese traditional clothing is almost exactly copied from the Tang style dress. Okay, architecture. To your left is a Tang style, Chinese Tang style, around 800 AD. Um, Buddhist temple. And on your right is a Japanese Buddhist temple. As you can see, the structure of architecture exactly the same. The Japanese did learn a lot from Tang China, Okay, Buddhism. All right. Last time we mentioned that um, Shinto was this ancient popular religion in Japan, right? Basically, people believe there's a gods or deities behind every natural phenomena or a mountain or river or whatever. Um, but Buddhism is actually a very different religion. Okay, Buddhism originated in India. Okay, far away from Japan around 200 AD. Buddhism through the Silk Road. Silk Road is this highway connecting East Asia and Europe and Central Asia. So through the Silk Road, Buddhism got transmitted to China through Afghanistan in Central Asia, and then very quickly became popular in China. Okay, Chinese embraced Buddhism. Okay, and they also made some changes to Buddhism. For example, the so-called Zen Buddhism, Zen, Zen Buddhism, is a Chinese invention of a Buddhist branch. Okay, you don't see Zen Buddhism in India. Okay, actually, Buddhism declined in India, where it originated, around the 9th and 10th century AD. You don't see Buddhism in India, right? Most of Indian people, they're not Buddhists, okay? Although Buddha was in India, okay? So Buddhism got popular in China, in East Asia. And from China, it got spread to Vietnam, to Korea, and to Japan. And Buddhism really changed all these East Asian countries. You must talk about Buddhism to understand East Asian society. Just like you have to talk about Christianity to understand America to a certain degree. Okay, same importance, similar importance. Okay. All right, so let's look at Buddhism. Buddha. Buddha certainly is not Japanese or Chinese. He's in India. Okay, according to Buddhist sutra. Okay, sutra means the classics or books. According to Buddhist sutra, Buddha was born in one of the small kingdoms in northern India, close to today's Nepal. So we don't know the color of skin of a Buddha. He could have a dark color skin color, or he could have a pale or lighter skin color. We don't know because there's a lot of ethnic diversity in today's in ancient India. All right, so Buddha is this was born in one of the kingdoms in northern India, and when he was born, there was a prophet that came to the kingdom, and the prophet talked to Buddha's father, and he says, Buddha's father certainly was the king. The prophet says, your son will either become a religious leader, or he will become a political leader. In this case, a king. Of course, Buddha's father wanted him to become a king. So Buddha was kept within the palace. He was not allowed to go out until he reached 29 or 30 years old. Okay, so for 29 or 30 years, the young Buddha was kept within the palace. He was given the best of the best. He never seen the outside world. He even got married. He even probably even had a child. But one night, Buddha decided to go out of the palace. If you look at these ancient pictures, this shows Buddha riding a horse is going out of the palace. And then in the outside world, he saw the real world and he saw suffering. And he realized that the nature of life, or the essence of life, is suffering, right? For example, humans are born with pain, right? You cry. Uh, the crying is the first thing you do after you're born, right? Um, and then when you're growing up, you feel growing pain, right? When you are an adult, you have desire, and desires are not met. You have pain. Um, and then when you get old, you get sick. You have pain, and then you die. You have pain. So you die in pain. So Buddha believes the essence of life is suffering. Okay, and then he is thinking, how do people get out of suffering? Okay, and his answer is that you must eliminate your desire. You must eliminate your desire, or at least control your desire, in order to uh, get rid of sufferings. So he's giving other people teaching. Okay, so the four noble truths here, the four noble truths of Buddha is that the essence of life is suffering, and the reason you have suffering is because you have desire. And in order to get rid of the sufferings, you have to eliminate the desires. And then that's the path. That's the way that Buddha gives you. Okay? So you have to follow this path. This path. The promise is that if you follow the path, you will get out of the reincarnations. Okay? You will get out of karma. You will not be conditioned or determined by karma anymore. You will reach an internal, permanent state of happiness that is called nirvana. Okay? I remember years ago there was this rock band called the Nirvana, right? When I was in college, I listened to Nirvana a lot. But now we're not talking about the rock band. Okay, we're talking about the ancient Indian concept that is the Buddhist enlightenment that is called Nirvana. Okay, so that's the teaching of Buddha in very simple terms. In very simple terms. Okay, uh, in most parts in the world, if you are a Buddhist, normally you would follow these teachings. Okay, you meditate every day, trying to control your mind, your mind and your body. You try to eliminate or at least manage your desires in order to have a Buddhist enlightenment. Hopefully, one day you can reach the state of nirvana. So that's basically the life of all the Buddhists in the world. There's some Buddhist monks. If you decide that you wanna pursue Buddhist enlightenment by abandoning your family, you're welcome to join the Buddhist community called Sangha. Sangha. This is a Sanskrit term. Sanskrit is the ancient India language. The Sangha means a Buddhist community. That means you become a Buddhist monk or a nun. You abandon your family. You join the Buddhist community, living in a monastery or a temple. Okay, this is how you sort of try to reach the state of a nirvana and become a living Buddha, perhaps. Okay, so yeah, so Buddhism very, very influential in Japan. Around 500 AD, Buddhism got transmitted into Japan from Korea. Originally, it's from China, right? So the original Buddhist sutras, the Buddhist classics that the Japanese obtained, were all written in classical Chinese. So you have to know Chinese to understand the Buddhist teachings. Okay, and all the early statues, Buddha statues or Bodhisattva statues are all from China, but very quickly the Japanese copied them and started to make their own. Well, this statue, by the way, this statue is not Buddha. Okay, this statue is a Bodhisattva statue. Okay, the difference between Buddha and the Bodhisattva is the following. Okay, Buddha is the person who lived in ancient India, who created Buddhism around 2,500 years ago. But after Buddha died, after Buddha dies, there were many later Buddhist sages, and these Buddhist sages they were believed to have reached nirvana, but they refused to get into this state of nirvana because there are still burning souls waiting for them to rescue in the hell. So those Buddhist sages, they refuse to go to nirvana, but instead go to hell, or at least in go return to the mundane world to help those burning souls, to help the people who need help. Okay, so these later sages are called bodhisattvas. So most Buddhist statues that you saw in museums, say the Metropolitan Museum in New York or the Art Institute in Chicago, in Boston, those statues are actually bodhisattva statues. They're not Buddha statues. Okay, yeah. Again, this is a popular bodhisattva, um, popular in East Asia called Guanyin Bodhisattva. Yeah, I'm saying the name in Chinese. Okay, Todaiji, the Great Eastern Temple, Buddhist temple, was built in Japan. In Japan, it was a copy of a Chinese Buddhist temple. As you can see, as we mentioned before, the structure of architecture is exactly the same. Is exactly the same. Okay, and there are Chinese Buddhist monks like this person, Kinja. He traveled to Japan. He attempted to cross the ocean 6 times, failed 6 times, but the seventh time he succeeded. He arrived in Japan, and then he brought Buddhist sutras into Japan. He also brought Chinese poetry, medicine books, Chinese medicine books, and then many other books to Japan. He's spreading Chinese culture in Japan. In Japan. So Todaiji, the Great Eastern Temple in Nara, Japan. The temple is still there. Okay, it was built originally in Japan in the seventh century. In the seventh century, yeah. We still have the primary sources about the first day when the temple is open. The emperor, Japanese emperor came. The noblemen came. The aristocrats came. Thousands of commoner came. They all came to honor the big bronze Buddha statue enshrined in the temple. The temple later was destroyed by fire. Unfortunately, most of the East Asian architectures are made by wood, so a dropping candle can easily destroy a whole building. But the Todaiji, the Great Eastern Temple, was rebuilt many times later, and the bronze Buddha statue there is still there after 1,000 years. More than 1,000 years, it's still there. So that's how Buddhism conquered Japan. Okay, local religion. In local religion, as we mentioned before, Shintoism or Shinto, the way of gods is the major form of a popular religion for the common folks. But when Buddhism came, it got spread from top to the bottom in the Japanese society. Okay, and then the Buddhist monks, a lot of times, in order to dominate the the local culture or the local religion in Japanese villages, they would invent all kinds of stories about how the guardians of Buddha or the guardians of protectors of Buddhism, how they came to Japan, and then how they subdue, defeat, conquer local evil deities, right? So you see all these stories about how Buddhism how Buddhist monks became the most powerful wizards in the local society. So Japanese popular culture was totally transformed by by Buddhism, by Buddhism. And the Buddhist monasteries became the largest landholders because the emperor, the aristocrats, even common people, they donate a lot to the Buddhist churches, the Buddhist monasteries. So centuries later, the Buddhist temples are so powerful and wealthy, they had to hire samurai to protect their own property, their own land. See, for example, this samurai is not a regular samurai. He's a Buddhist samurai. He's not hired by any feudal lords or daimyo. He is hired by a local Buddhist monastery. But this creates a lot of problem, right? When Buddhist monasteries hire samurai to fight and to protect their land and fight against other feudal lords, this could be against Buddhist teaching because non-killing is a major Buddhist teaching, right? So, as a Buddhist samurai, how can you be a samurai but at the same time a Buddhist? It's a difficult. It's kind of hard to reconcile, right? Because you have to kill as a samurai, but as a Buddhist, you cannot kill. So, so a lot of adaptations have to be made. A lot of adaptations have to be made. All right. So if you look at your textbook, it lists all the power struggles in the highest power echelon at the royal court between clans or either support Buddhism or against Buddhism. Okay, so there are a lot of struggles. Okay, eventually, we're gonna skip all the details, but eventually, just remember, Buddhism won the day. Buddhism won the day. Okay, it was sponsored, endorsed by the emperor. By the emperor. Eventually, with the power of the imperial court, Buddhism was spread all over the society. All over the society. Okay, we're going to talk about this later. All right. So next we're gonna. Oh, this is a typical Japanese castle built during this classical time. Okay, next we're gonna talk about the story of a Prince Shotoku. Shotoku was the regent. Um, he was the actual leader of Japan around early seventh century. Okay, during this time, the the Japanese ruler they learned from Chinese. They used the title of Tian Huang here. That means the heavenly emperor to call themselves. They gave themselves this title basically. Okay, and they try to follow the model of Chinese empire to centralize their power. So this is a major reform that is taking place in in the Japanese empire. Okay, before this reform, there was a lot of feudalism in Japan. By feudalism, we mean there are many local feudal lords. Okay, local villages, local farmers, they don't pay tax to the central imperial government. They don't even recognize the power of the emperor because the emperor is so far away from them. They don't care. Ordinary Japanese villagers, they don't care about the emperor. Okay, they only care about their immediate ruler, that is the local feudal lord, to which the local villagers pay tax to. Okay, in this case, the tax payment is in the form of the actual products from the land. Okay, either crops or whatever, the silk cloth or other things. You don't pay tax in the form of currency. There was no cash. Cash it's not a money economy. Okay, so the Japanese imperial government they wanted to build a strong centralized government like China. So this is where Prince Shotoku fits in. Okay, so the imperial government not only supported Buddhism, and the emperor claimed that Buddhism is the only legal religion in the whole nation. Everybody must follow that. And at a certain point, the emperor even issued a decree to order everybody to become a vegetarian, because we know that Buddhists are vegetarian, right? So this change in diet probably explains why the average height of a traditional Japanese are shorter than the height of a Chinese. Okay, so the in order to transform Japan into a mini China, the I'm sorry, Japanese imperial government they did many things. They sent a lot of students to China. Okay, they sent a lot of students to China. Most of these students they study in China for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Some of them even stayed the rest of their lives in China. Some Japanese even served in the Chinese government for many years before they returned to Japan. Uh, so these Japanese students they brought back all these Chinese culture. So these Japanese students they are transforming the rebuild Japan on the model of China. And at the same time, the imperial government is spreading Buddhism. Okay, um, they're trying to promote a vegetarian diet, but for traditional Japanese, fish, birds, and all seafood are not considered as meat. So even if you're a Buddhist, a vegetarian Buddhist, you can still eat fish. So sushi is okay. Shotoku. Shotoku is behind. Prince Shotoku is behind all these major policies. Okay, this is Shotoku, and you can see him on this 10,000 Japanese yen bill. Okay, his portrait is printed on the money. Is on the money. Okay. Okay, so this page shows you all the major Buddhist branches. We don't have time to talk about that. If you are interested, you can take a quick look. There are many different Buddhist branches popular in Japan. Most of them were transmitted to Japan from China, like the Zen Buddhism. We're gonna talk about this next time. Buddhism, the Sanskrit or the esoteric Buddhism, and other branches. And Pure Land Buddhism. All these are different Buddhist branches. They are all popular in Japan. Okay. Taika reform. In the year of 646, there was a major political reform uh, happened in Japan. Okay, this the purpose of this reform is to turn Japan into another China. Basically, they try to build a centralized empire in Japan, like China. Okay, so this reform is comparable to the major reforms that happened in the 1860s. It's a turning point of Japanese history. So if there are two turning points in Japanese history, first one is Taika reform. Second one is major reform. The first one turned Japan into sort of a civilization comparable to the continent. And the second turning point, that is major reform, turned Japan into a modern nation. Okay, very, very important. Okay, all right. So these are the points, these are the policies of Taika reform. First, the imperial government tried to build a centralized political power. It turned all these feudal lands into 60 strong koku. Koku pretty much just like prefectures. It's a administrative units, a little smaller than provinces, prefectures, okay, and neighborhoods. Um, and the government is building a bureaucracy. A bureaucracy. This is a copy from China. Okay, the Japanese are trying to build a bureaucracy. That means to hire talented officials to staff your offices. Right. Previously, feudalism was popular in Japan. That means political power is divided by based on blood, right? Birth order is also determines your political power. That's feudalism, right? Your brother is also your minister, right? But for a centralized empire, you need to have a bureaucracy. You need to have a rational methods of a promotion and demotion of officials. You hire officials into your government, and then you evaluate the merits of officials. If they're good, they got promoted. If they're doing poorly, they got demoted, right? Just like a company, okay? So this is what we call bureaucracy. The bureaucracy is very different from feudalism, because in feudalism you have to hire your brother, okay? So that's the first thing. Um, so the first policy of a Taika reform is that Japan is transforming from feudalism into a centralized bureaucracy. Second, the state is trying to nationalize all lands. The emperor is saying, "Hey, all lands are mine." Okay, feudal lords, local feudal lords, no, 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 you don't have lands. Although you traditionally control the land, but you don't have it now. Okay, and then the government also freed all slaves, but this works only on paper. Okay, the imperial government simply just sent a decree to all feudal lords, local feudal lords, saying, "Hey, free your slaves. Okay, you cannot have your slaves working for you for free. Now the slaves are they belong to the state, and the state would divide the land periodically, equally among all people, uh, all registered population under the government. So as registered household, you will get a one piece of land from the imperial government, and you grow your crops on the land for a certain period. Okay, the government guarantees your right to use the land, and if you die, then the land will be taken away, taken back, will be given back to the government, and then governments would redivide the land, redistribute the land to other people who need it. So that's the purpose of the reform. The state also pays salaries to the aristocrats because the local feudal lords they gave up the land. Right now, the land were taken by the state. Slaves became farmers who pay tax to the government, directly to the central government. So this is a major change in Japan. Okay, and then the government would redistribute land every 6 years, depending on the condition of a population. Right, if some household, if you don't have descendants and die at the age of 60 or 70, after you die, your land is taken away by the government and given to somebody else. Tax is also standardized. Okay, you pay actual product from your land as tax, but you don't pay it to the feudal lords. You pay the tax to the central government because the central government give you the land, right? You also have to pay labor service for free to the central government. All these four major policies are exactly the Chinese style central government policies. So in other words, the Taika reform is trying to turn Japan into China. Okay, why is it called Taika reform? Taika is the reign title of the emperor who ruled Japan at the time. Look at that, Taika. Okay, so each Japanese emperor would have two names at least. One is his personal name, the other is his reign title. He got his reign title on the day when he was enthroned. Okay, so once the old emperor died, when the new emperor came to power, he would have a new reign title. So that's how you get a new reign title. For example, in World War II, the Japanese emperor, his personal name is Hirohito, right? We're talking about World War II. Emperor Hirohito, that's his personal name, but he also has a reign title. His reign title is Showa. So sometimes we refer to the Japanese emperor by his reign title, Showa. Sometimes we refer to him by his personal name. Both refer to the same thing. Both are the same thing. Okay, Emperor Taika. His reign title, the literal meaning of Taika means great transformation. So he picked up this reign title clearly with the intention to have a major reform. So that's Taika reform. Uh, but Taika reform, to a certain degree, failed because we know that centuries later, Japan again fell back into feudalism. The central government's power declined very quickly. Well, then the question is why Taika reform failed? Well, part of the reason is because, in my opinion, I mean, long story short, the reason why Taika reform failed is because Japan is not China. And one explanation is geography. If you look at China, if you once you control the central plain in China as a central government, you pretty much control all the provinces. Okay, you can send your army to any provinces without a problem. Okay, without the resistance. Yeah, because you as a Chinese emperor, once you control the central plain, you monopolize the most resources, which allowed you to unify militarily entire China without a problem. But if you look at Japan, there's so many islands in Japan, right? And even in the Honshu Island, the biggest island in Japan, there are still many mountains, many rivers, right? Those mountains are 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 impassable. Okay, you cannot pass them during winters. So the central government in Nara or Kyoto, they cannot. It's very difficult for them to send army to Shikoku, to Kyushu, to those islands to conquer those local feudal lords who resist central government. It's very difficult. So this is why there is a natural tendency in Japanese culture to have feudalism, to have feudalism. Actually, central empire never got built until Meiji Restoration. So if you look at the two turning points of Japanese history, one is Taika reform, the other is Meiji reform. Ironically, both reforms try to build a central empire. The first one failed, second one succeeded. So that's one way to look at Japanese history. So this will end up our lecture on the continental influences.